Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the Q&A. Before we get into the questions, I did want to address something I was talking about last week, and I believe I had overstated, and this is to do with the Great Jungle Worm encounter. Last week I was on a bit of a tirade about it, saying, oh, it's such a shame that it's become so easy now. If you guys are a little bit out of the loop, they changed the way all of the scaling works in early level zones, and this has made the Great Jungle Worm easier, but it's not as bad as I was originally saying. At first, I thought the entire thing was going to become very trivial. However, it seems only one specific part of the encounter is now easier. The way that the worm works is it's got two phases, essentially. In the first phase, you cannot crit the boss. And because a lot of the scaling changes have occurred with the way crit damage scales, basically the phase 1 stuff hasn't changed much, if at all. You still can't crit him. You do about the same amount of damage in burn phases, maybe slightly more because of the extra sigils and build stuff and power creep that's come in the game, but otherwise it's still pretty much on the general level it was before. The difference now with the worm is that when you do proc it into phase 2, which is very difficult for pugs to do, I will add, once you get it into phase 2, it's now really easy. And I'm going to do a complete 180 on what I said last week. I actually think this is a positive change for the encounter. Phase 2 was always really interesting. Phase 1 had a lot of cool mechanics. It required you to have people set up to trigger burn phases. It required you to have good coordination to get lots of damage out. It required you to have decent mob control, set up certain people, QandA players for example, to kill certain enemies, other people to stop certain things from spawning in the first place. There was a lot of depth there. And to push it into phase 2, not only did you need all of that coordination on your own worm, but you also needed to kill all 3 across different corners of the map. There was a lot going on. It was the kind of stuff though that while there were a lot of mechanics, you could get good at it, you could learn it, and then do it reliably. It was really well designed in that sense. If you didn't know the encounter, you'd have a horrible time, but once you knew and you set stuff up, it was a reliable thing you could keep doing. Phase 2 was sort of the opposite. Phase 2 had, especially when the encounter first came out, a lot of RNG involved with it and very few mechanics to play around with and learn. Phase 2 was basically just a massive DPS wall. It was, hey, you did all of this complicated cool stuff and you've mastered it in phase 1, now prove you have a ton of damage. And many times people didn't have a ton of damage. Most of the kills that ever happened in that encounter were because of bugs for a long while until they finally nerfed the health. And while I liked the idea of something being very challenging, the problem with phase 2 was always that it was a big challenge with little you could work towards. Like, you do it and you feel like you did everything perfectly. Everyone dodge rolled the right stuff, you got him against the wall, you did as much damage as you possibly could, and the game was still telling you it's not enough, and you failed again. And it was incredibly frustrating, especially in the early days, incredibly frustrating to come so far, do so much, and just be completely at a loss for what to do better next time, you know, aside from meticulously going through every single player's build and getting really elitist about the kind of gear people are running and try and regulate 150 different players worth of gear. Like, it was just very frustrating. Now with the change, phase 2, slowly since the encounter came out, phase 2 has been getting easier and easier, and now phase 2 is very easy. You can complete it in half the time that the devs give you. They give you a 2-minute timer to kill the bosses, and you can easily do it with like a minute left on the clock now. I don't think we've quite made it that far, but it's definitely doable. But I'm an advocate for it, because there's not much skill in just DPS in that second part. The true challenge of the encounter is now getting through that phase 1 stuff, doing all that complicated stuff that can be done with regularity. And so yeah, I was talking about it last week. I thought it was a horrible change. I think it might not be so bad. I also had a lot of comments from people saying, what are you talking about? We tried it. Apparently my guildies went and saw a pug attempted run at the worm, and it was just horrendous. Nobody was QandAing husks, nobody was blocking eggs, nobody knew anything that was going on. And so I do believe the encounter is probably still quite a difficult one in the game. You need to learn a lot of stuff. You need to know stuff and have coordination to get through phase 1. You cannot just zerg it down. But it does mean that now once you do nail that stuff, you can win through phase 2 without much issue, and I retract what I was originally saying, basically. Anyway, on to the questions. I guess the first one, this is in no particular order, comes from Tactical Luke 43, who says, hey WP, what do you think about PvP matchmaking system for arenas? I ask because with the influx of new players, I hear a lot of people complain about unbalanced teams in terms of ranks, and I myself found matched against much higher than my estimated skill level recently. For example, I was matched against you multiple times after playing PvP for less than 3 days. The sad truth, and yes, I have been PvPing a little bit more now. I didn't get like super addicted to it, which I usually do. It's a lot of fun, but I'm still doing just as much PvE in World vs. World as I often would, instead of just focusing on one game type, which is kind of weird. But yeah, the sad truth about this is the matchmaking has never been good, and I largely attribute this to the fact there isn't a huge population. I feel like the matchmaking would probably be amazing if 10,000 to 100,000 people were PvPing all the time, all day, every day, but we simply don't have those numbers. Even with more people coming into PvP now because of the new rewards, it's not everyone, and we don't have enough for it to be really picky and choosy about who you get matched with. And you can tell this is true because still, if you try and solo queue or if you try and team queue, you can be waiting upwards of 5 minutes to get in a match. 5 minutes may not seem like that long, but it does mean that there aren't enough players around to instantly pop queues, and until you get to that point, how can the system always give you the perfect enemies to go against? I did hear that they changed the matchmaking slightly while I was away from PvP, in that now you should never see the same team more than 3 times if you lose to them 3 times in a row, I believe. So I was doing team queues the other day, and this is what was said to me, that we lost to the same team 3 times, and everyone said, oh, that's fine, we won't see them again now. And that never used to be an element of PvP as far as I'm aware. I'm not sure how much truth there is to that, because we did see that team again just like maybe an hour later. But that is something apparently that's been implemented and will make things easier. As for solo queue, obviously it's all random all the time, whoever's on the teams. And I tend to see a lot of familiar faces, which again is another sign that there's just not that many people playing it. To help you out of your predicament, maybe I should suggest you play one of the meta really easy builds, run around on an MM Necro or something, because you can be quite useful even while you're bad at the game on those builds, and hopefully it won't be too much of a problem for you. The next question is from Epscas, who says, how did you earn so much gold for Bifrost, and how many gold did you earn per hour? I don't know whether I mentioned this on the channel, apologies if I did, but all of this came from dungeon running on Bifrost. My current ascended armor, my current goal in Guild Wars 2, I should let you guys know, I will be doing a video on it when I reach it, is I want to reach stat cap. I want to have full ascended everything and all of the little infusions at +5 all over my character, so I am still farming for gold as much as I possibly can, and the way I've been doing this is going through all the dungeons every single day, except Arar. I've stopped doing that so much recently because I don't have a team that knows what they're doing, and Arar seems to have an endless influx of people who have never done the dungeon before, so you have to teach people every time you go in there. But yeah, most of the dungeons and most of the paths every day, I get 30 to 50 gold per day every day, and I make 1 Damask every day at the moment for my ascended armor. I did see someone on Reddit put up a little tool that they made where you can input the amount of gold you expect to make each day and what you're going for, and it will tell you how many days it takes to get, so maybe you can look into that if you like. And I'm sure there are better ways to earn gold. The TP has always been the best way to earn gold. If you're very smart with that, then you can get amazing amounts of money. And selling Arar paths, I think, is absolutely up there as one of the best PvE non-trading post ways to earn gold in the game. It's interesting, I have been hearing about small scale farms people keep very close to their chest and earn lots of money. For example, there's one supposedly in the Straits of Devastation, some underwater event that you can earn tons of money from, but I don't know specifics, and I'm immensely curious about that stuff, whether these people with ridiculous amount of gold do have small scale farms that they keep very close to themselves, and there are real honeypots out there in Guild Wars 2 that we just don't know about. I like that in concept, but I'm pretty cynical about how many of those can really exist. The next question is from HuluBear83, who says, what are your thoughts on the idea of level difficulty for dungeons, sort of like easy, medium, and hard, and nightmare modes that you get in a lot of games? I know you were mentioning how easy stacking makes things in a lot of dungeons, so boss and mob mechanics could be more different and require more strategy the harder you go. I've given some thought to even perhaps comparing it to fractals. The higher level of your difficulty, the harder it gets. Heck, why not throw in agony and the promises of higher rewards for doing higher versions of dungeon paths to get players invested and keep the flame burning? I think this is a great idea. One of the longest standing things people have been suggesting for dungeons is the idea of gambits. This was even being floated out before the instabilities were revealed to be a thing of fractals, and I think this could bring so much life to the dungeons. Some process of rebalancing the amount of tokens you get for a dungeon path, as well as the things you can spend tokens on, and then rewarding more tokens for harder difficulties or enabling more gambits, would be awesome. I've always loved, for example, in the Halo franchise, the skulls that you can toggle on and off, and yeah, the Guild Wars 2 dungeons this would work perfectly with. Reward people more for being able to duo or solo dungeons on harder difficulties, toggle more things on or off. You can get really creative with the kind of gambits that could go into the game. It's just that I think ArenaNet don't consider it a priority anymore. They dissolved their dungeon team a long time ago, very shortly after launch, and they've largely been untouched except for the rebalancing of rewards. I find it curious that in the feature patch they went to the effort of removing the boss chests you get and making them just daily, and that maybe suggests that they're going to be doing some kind of reward overhaul or gambit style system, some kind of touch up to the dungeon experience in the future. But you know, that's quite speculative already. I don't think there's been any statements one way or the other from them about dungeons, and maybe, you know, they could just as much do this, or they could get rid of them all and try and do entirely new ones. For now, I'm still content with the way the dungeons are in the game, and I'm sort of still learning stuff about them, still having fun, but I can see why really long-term players would be getting very bored and very excited by this prospect. I'm certainly not going to say no to it. It sounds fantastic to me too. Erez Amir says, what's your magic find? Quick little question. My magic find, and the reason I picked this, is because it's at exactly 100 right now. It's not very high, and this is because I've never really salvaged my greens or blues. I like to merch them, and I'm aware that this may not be the most efficient way of earning money, but basically whenever I've bumped my magic find up, it's been because I've done it in a huge bulk. Like, I had a huge bulk of magic find I got from PvP when they made that change a while ago, and I opened thousands and thousands of tournament chests, salvaged all of those down, got a bunch of magic find. I got another huge infusion of magic find when I was salvaging ectos at one point. I can't remember why. I guess I was looking for a lot of crystalline dust, but that gives you a sick amount of magic find. It's unbelievable, and that bumped me up a whole bunch more. So I'm at exactly 100. Well, technically I'm at 110 because I've got 100 exactly from luck, and I've got 10 exactly from achievements. And yeah, I don't know whether I really want to go much higher. As interesting as it is to me to have like that 300% base, I'm not sure I want to spend all the money on it. I'm aware that the best way to get your magic find up if other people are interested is to buy ectos straight up. You buy the ectos, you salvage them, get tons and tons of magic find, but also dust, and then you sell the dust back on the trading post. And this will cost you money. You are spending money for magic find, but it's not that much. It's like you can get a ton of magic find for 10 gold, 20 gold. If you sunk 100 gold onto just buying ectos to salvage for dust to sell again, you're going to put your magic find very high. I think eventually I'd like to be at around the 200 mark, but I also undervalue magic find hugely in Guild Wars 2. The other day on Twitter, I actually posted that I was doing a bit of a test as I did my big dungeon sweep. I specifically popped a magic find booster, I had magic find food, I had a magic find infusion on my amulet, and I had a birthday booster on. In total, I put myself up to 240% magic find or something very, very high, much higher, over double what I originally had. And then I did the entire dungeon sweep, and I wanted to see how much difference does this really make. The answer? Practically none. It's quite rare for me to get loads in dungeons. I did get 2 lodestones on that day while I was running them, but I don't think that even had anything to do with the magic find, because that came from the dungeon chests rather than anything else, and apparently the dungeon chests magic find doesn't affect, just like so much else in the game. So, you know, I undervalue it. I don't think it's amazing. I think it's pretty useful if you're farming tier 6 mats, I guess, but otherwise, what's the point in spending so much money? Just slowly work your way up to it. That's been my philosophy the whole time. The next question is from Zargnath, who says, I saw a post on Reddit about the new trait system and the requirements to acquire these traits. You may have seen it yourself. Apparently, one of the adept tier traits requires 100% map completion of Frostgorge Sound, and there are several others that are associated with level 60 plus content. How well do you think this new trait system was implemented? Personally, I think it's ridiculous that a level 36 character should have to do content so far above his or her current level that it's practically impossible to finish to have the ability to use these traits and pretty much be forced to buy them for gold. See, this makes one assumption. I do think it may be a little short-sighted. It seems like they just played a game of darts, and wherever their darts ended up, they decided to stick different tasks on acquiring certain traits. However, there could be some intelligent design here. I don't think it's an outrageous, ludicrous thing for them to have done, because there is nothing saying you have to have this trait. I think a big thing in RPGs that I particularly enjoy is, as I'm leveling up, I see something I want and I can't get it straight away. and then you're working towards it. I tend to have a lot less fun in RPGs if I'm just handed something before I even realise I want it. For example, you go to a new vendor, you see a cool weapon, and oh look, I already have the gold to buy it, that's awesome, I'll get it. As opposed to, you see a cool weapon, but you need to earn a little bit more gold first. Giving people goals like this, I think, could be quite smart. You know, you're going to get new players in the game now, at level 36, who see this trait, maybe are sort of interested in it, and see, oh wow, this takes map completion of this zone. They go there, they realise it's a level 80 zone. And I don't think they're going to be too disheartened. I, as a player, wouldn't be really disheartened by that. I think, oh wow, okay, this is quite a long-term goal. I'll remember this, I really want to go for this. I'll go level up, and it gives them that more excitement to reach level 80. It's something else they want to do once they get to level 80. For the established players who just really want the trait and they don't want to fuss about with that stuff, then buying is the option. But I do think for completely new players, this could be a positive thing. I haven't played a new character since the patch went out, so if it turns out nearly all of the traits have these ridiculous, ludicrous requirements to get, then I won't be very happy. But I think this in premise isn't necessarily a super bad thing. Of course, the other side of the story is true too here, where they give you traits before you can even use them. I was running around in Edge of the Mist with a friend, and he was leveling his new warrior, and he started unlocking all these traits before he could even access his trait page. That, I think, is wrong too. It's the complete opposite situation we have with the Frostgorge thing, where people are unlocking stuff before they realise they want it or even how to use it. And you're having these issues on both ends of the spectrum, sort of suggests they might not have put too much thought in it. But still, in premise, I like the system so much, I'm willing to forgive them for it, because just the idea of exploring the world to unlock traits is a very cool one to me. Next question is from the Dan3 Play, who says, what happened to Kuunavang after Guild Wars 1? I never heard anything about him ever again. Have I missed a massive amount of lore, or is it really not said anywhere? No, you haven't missed anything. Kuunavang has not been mentioned at all. Even back in Guild Wars 1, she was barely mentioned. There was like one mention of the Salt Spray Dragons in Nightfall, which is the campaign after Factions came out, where you helped a dumb warrior dude hatch a dragon egg, and then he ends up having this pet. But even that didn't reference Kuunavang directly. Kuunavang really did fall very much into the background, as did much of the Factions lore. You guys should remember, in Factions, they established this whole process of death, and the fact that every human that dies, at the very least, has their soul specifically escorted to the mist by these characters called the Envoys. Like, there was this whole thing that was never mentioned again. A lot of it's fallen into the dust, and this is one of the reasons I'm most curious about returning to QandA and see how the devs update that kind of stuff. Are the Envoys still about? Do they help the Norn? And in theory, Kuunavang should still be around and alive, considering this was only 250 years ago, and she was already an ancient entity long before that, and that would be an encounter I'd very much like to have at some point, since we were never allowed to speak to Glint in Guild Wars 2. And again, you've got Glint's baby. I'll stop now before I go off on a huge tangent. The last question is from the Poon Poon, who says, it's a great name, who has two questions. Number one was, how long did it take you to make your incinerator? And the second is, do I command in World vs. World? Making my incinerator isn't something I can really put my thumb on, because I never was interested in making a legendary for a long time. But about 8 to 9 months after launch, I decided, hey, I may as well go for it. The thing that really tipped me off was I saw a thief in one of the Shiver Peak areas, and this thief was wielding an incinerator in one hand and a fractal dagger in the other hand, and it had like an ice and fire kind of thing going on, and it made me think, wow, I really want some cool gear. That's why I eventually went for my incinerator, and when I made that decision, I already had everything I needed just from playing the game. Like, I never farmed hardcore for it. I was just playing Guild Wars 2 for about 8 months, and then I had the stuff. So it's really hard for me to say with my first legendary how long it took me to get. As for the World vs. World commanding thing, no. And it's one of the things that still really intimidates me about this game. I wouldn't know the first thing about how to command in World vs. World. I transferred to Blackgate, the server, about 2 weeks ago now, and I was locked out until just the other day, because you're locked out for the next 2 matchups in World vs. World if you try and transfer in the middle of a tournament. However, Tier 1 World vs. World gameplay finally opened up to me earlier this week. I went in there and experienced it mostly over the course of one evening. Currently, Blackgate is being 2v1'd by Jade Quarry and Tarnished Coast, so it was kind of insane. This was my first experience of Tier 1, and it was literally, we were forced up almost to our door the entire time. We had an entire server's worth of players defending one tower for almost the entire evening. It was a very interesting experience, and I was listening in TeamSpeak, doing the whole hog to a commander of how he was sort of leading everyone around. And in some ways, it seemed kind of hardcore-ish, and, you know, lots of stuff going on. And in a lot of other ways, it seemed really casual and kind of easy, just run around, zerg, and tag stuff. To be honest with you, I found it kind of funny on that night. Some people were saying, oh, PvE is so boring. And honestly, the thing I found this was most akin to was running around trying to tag tag stuff and farm things like the old Ember farm. That's what World vs. World felt like to me, mostly. However, that may not be a standard experience of Tier 1 World vs. World, just because of the 2v1, and maybe I'll have some more opinions later. As for commanding, I wouldn't dare touch it unless I had World vs. World a lot, because there's going to be a lot of people listening to you, and you have to know what you're doing. Otherwise, you're going to look like a moron, and you're going to make everyone suffer. Anyway, there you go, guys. That's the Q&A for today. A quick reminder as well, there will be a weird farm later on this week. Feel free to follow me on Twitter if you want to know exactly when that's coming out. I don't know exactly what it's going to be on either, for the record, right now. I guess it will be some kind of new champ train, even though many of them have been nerfed, like one that spans multiple maps. But we'll see. The mega servers still put me off slightly, because even during guild missions at the moment, I'm being split across tons of different servers, and I don't know how that would handle with doing a big community meetup. But we will cross the bridge when we come to it. Thanks again, guys, very much. If you've got any questions, leave them down below, and I will see you next time.